What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the wonderful folks at Tease, and welcome to week 7 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2018 CFL season. We had ourselves a heck of a week in week 6. In week 6, we stuck to our guns, and for the most part, our guns delivered. 3-1 in week 6, both straight up and against the spread. The 3-1 against the spread I'm particularly proud of because that brings us up over 500 against the spread on the season. Straight up, we're now 15-8. We're almost doubling up our correct picks to incorrect picks. That's pretty close to where we want to be. Against the spread, we are now 12-11-0 on the season. Over under, we split them. We went 2-2. That has us 14-9 over under on the season, and I believe that's the first time this season that we've had more straight up wins than over under wins. Updating you quickly on the CFL standings before we go any further. In the East Division, Ottawa retains the East Division lead. They are at 3-2, outscoring opponents 23-22. Hamilton in second place, the only other team in the East Division with more than one win. They are at 2-3. 23-23 scoring split, so it's even across the board there, and we got to talk about Hamilton. Toronto and Montreal both sitting at 1-4 records. Toronto being outscored 28-16, Montreal being outscored 30-14. But it's in the West Division where things get super interesting. Calgary still undefeated on the season. They're still way out front in the West, 5-0, outscoring opponents 29-9. Right now, there's nobody that's touching Calgary. Edmonton and Saskatchewan are both at 3-2 in a share of second place. I give the edge to Edmonton because they are outscoring opponents by a single point, 26-25, whereas Saskatchewan is being outscored by a single point, 23-22. But you have the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who are also a 3-win team. They're behind Saskatchewan and Edmonton because they've played 6 games. Everybody else has played 5. Winnipeg is 3-3, outscoring opponents 33-22. The BC Lions bringing up the rear in the West Division, 2-3, being outscored 28-22. Our 4-game Week 7 schedule in the CFL sees the Edmonton Eskimos travel to Montreal to take on the Alouettes, and in classic Vegas style, they're being cowards because of Montreal's big trade. There's no line, there's no total on this game. Toronto traveling to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers. That's a rematch from last week. Winnipeg won that game, and we'll talk about it. Ottawa traveling to the Hammer to take on the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and Calgary hitting the road going to Saskatchewan to take on the Roughriders. Let's start with that first game, the game that Vegas is being cowardly on, Edmonton and Montreal. Typically, I begin with the road team and then go to the home team second. I'm going to flip the script on this one, and I'm, in this game in particular, going to talk about Montreal first. The reason is not that Montreal's coming off of their 25-8 loss to Calgary. We pretty well all knew that was going to happen, but yours truly did correctly predict that they would cover the plus 20 on the spread. They only lost by 17, so cha-ching there. But Montreal has officially become Money-Trial. The Montreal Alouettes and Hamilton Tiger Cats make a blockbuster 5-player, multiple first-round pick deal, and Montreal acquires Johnny Manziel. And what does this mean? Well, first of all, it means a lot of things, but what it primarily means is that we're going to finally get to see Johnny Manziel play some regular season CFL football because he doesn't have the quarterback in front of him like he did in Hamilton. Johnny Manziel, we're going to see him in this football game. It's already come out that he's not going to start, but we are going to see a specific package built for him in this football game. Of note, Montreal also acquiring wide receiver Adarius Bowman. And if you're not familiar with that name, Adarius Bowman was at a time one of the most dominant wide receivers in the CFL. He's a former 4-time 1,000-yard receiver, but he is 33 years old. Traded over from Winnipeg. He's played in all 6 of Winnipeg's games this season. He's only got 9 catches. He does not have a touchdown. He is capable of being dominant in this league. If he can build some rapport with Johnny Manziel, could be a bit of a career resurgence for Bowman, but Montreal trying to make moves to address that offense. I like seeing that from a team that knows where they're really struggling. The only Week 6 positive that I can see from Montreal was the fact that they had a strong and an underutilized run game. The team combined for 62 yards on 14 carries. 62 yards doesn't seem like a lot, but that's 4.5 yards per carry almost. That's perfectly fine. If you're setting your team up in 2nd and 6, 2nd and 5 pretty consistently with the run game, there's nothing wrong with that. And they beat Calgary in the yards per carry category in that game. Calgary only had 2.9, less than 3 yards per carry. If Montreal can set themselves up with a game plan week to week where they walk into every football game and say, if nothing else, we're going to win the run game. We can beat teams consistently in the run game. We just beat the Calgary Stampeders on the ground. That's a big feather in the cap of a team that is basically the worst team in the league right now. Let's talk about Edmonton. The Eskimos coming off of a 16-15 win over Toronto. That was back in Week 5. The Eskimos were on bye last week. And I talked about it in the video last week, but it was Mike Riley, man. In the 4th quarter on the Edmonton Eskimos' last drive of the game, Riley makes 3 huge plays, 2 with his arm, 1 with his feet, to keep that last drive alive, run out the clock. Also for the Eskimos, probably my breakout player of the year so far in the CFL is Eskimos wide receiver Tequil Williams. And I talked about him in either the Week 2 video, maybe Week 3, something like that. In Week 5, had a monster game against Toronto. 9 catches, 123 yards, found the end zone as well. He leads the CFL now in receiving yards, targets. He's 2nd in touchdowns. He's 2nd in catches. In my opinion, Tequil Williams is the best wide receiver in the CFL. The one thing I will say about the Eskimos is I feel like this is a team that does need to address the defense, because despite the fact that they're scoring 26 points a game, they're also giving up 25. 25 points a game, it doesn't really tell the whole story. It's bad enough as it is, but it doesn't really tell the whole story. If you go through individual stat categories for defensive players, only twice will you see an Edmonton Eskimos player inside the top 10 in any one of those categories. What that says to me is the Esks on defense are not getting it done on an individual level, and that's translating to not really getting it done on the defensive level. Edmonton needs to shore up that defense if they want to compete with the Calgarys, with the Winnipegs, who are putting up a ton of points this season, and against a team that is better suited to exploit their defense, like I mentioned with a Winnipeg or a Calgary. They might be in trouble this week, would the Eskimos be. They're not against a team that is capable of doing that. Like, even though the game's in Montreal, and I think Montreal will win games for the rest of the season, I don't think it's going to be this week. So I'm going to take Edmonton on the road in Montreal to beat the Alouettes. Obviously, I will be watching this game with keen interest tomorrow to see exactly what Johnny Manziel is going to do on a CFL football field, see what that package looks like, see if they're utilizing him well, the way that I think he should be utilized. I don't think it's going to translate into a win. I'm going to take Edmonton. There's no line in this game, no spread, no total. And again, Vegas are a bunch of cowards. So there's no line in this. I will update it in the comments as I did last week, and actually pretty well, I think, got both of those picks right, I believe. So, hey. Let's go to the peg now, where we have a rematch from last week, Toronto and Winnipeg. We'll start with the Argos coming off of that 38-20 loss last week to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And the story of the game for Toronto, as far as I'm concerned, is just not enough. It wasn't enough across the board. The team started slow, they finished slow. Between the first quarter and the fourth quarter, the Argos only scored a single point. It was 1 point in the first quarter. They scored nothing in the fourth quarter. Something else to talk about with the Argos in terms of their run game, it's really not there. I mean, even in a passers league like the CFL, you have to try. As a team, the Argos had 22 rushing yards on just 9 attempts. 19 of those 22 yards came off of the 3 carries from running back Brandon Burks. Yeah, Brandon Burks. So I had to double check the name. It says 19 of the 22 yards, 12 of them came on a single carry. That's not trying. I get it. It's a passer's league, but you don't have Ricky Ray back there. So you've got to figure it out. You've got to figure out how to incorporate your run game. Even when you get behind, you can't completely abandon your run game in this league. Argos only possessed the football for 25 minutes in that game. Gee, I wonder why. Could it be because maybe they didn't run the ball at all? Maybe run the ball a little. That's a possibility. And they only threw for just over 58%. Not good enough. Not enough all the way around. Meanwhile, on Winnipeg's side, had a big bounce back game from quarterback Matt Nichols. Nichols went 19 of 27, that is 70%, 245 yards, found the end zone twice, did not throw an interception, also had a rushing touchdown on the goal line, and we had another absolutely dominant game from Blue Bombers running back Andrew Harris, 29 total touches, 27 of them being rushes, 177 total yards, nothing wrong with that, 2 total touchdowns, had 1 rushing and 1 receiving, just a monster game across the board for Andrew Harris. Argos had no answer. Blue Bombers did take 5 penalties on defense. That's more than I would like to see in the run of a game, but they did have 2 sacks. They forced 3 fumbles on the game. They also had an interception. That probably made up for it. To me, this matchup only starts to get closer. The gap between these two teams only gets smaller when Toronto decides that they want to try to run the ball. That's where it begins and ends for me. If Toronto is not willing to run the football, they're not going to beat a team like Winnipeg. I have to take the Blue Bombers here. I'm going to take Winnipeg, especially now where the game is in Winnipeg. I'm going to take Winnipeg to beat Toronto in Winnipeg. Reflective of the game last week, the Blue Bombers are favored in this game by 11 points. It's a pretty big spread. I get a little squirrely when things get into double digits. Total in the game is set at 53 points. Take a look at the game last week. Winnipeg won by 18 points and they scored 58. So what that's telling me is to go Winnipeg minus 11 and take the over. But the Blue Bombers do tend to play better defense when they're at home versus when they're on the road. I don't know what we're getting from Toronto's offense week in and week out. So I am going to take that Winnipeg minus 11. I think they should be able to comp this game by a couple of scores. But I'm going to stay under on it because I don't think Winnipeg will necessarily run away with the game in the second half like they did last week. So I think their point total will be a bit lower, and I think Toronto's point total is going to be lower as well. So I'm going to tell you to stay under the 53 points, but I'm going to grab that Winnipeg minus 11. Wish I would have been able to get it a couple days ago when it was at minus 9.5. Folks, I'm a complicated man. You may hear my fan going in the background here to try to cool myself off, but at the same time, I'm drinking hot tea. Hot Nerd Tease tea, in fact. Nerdtease.ca. Today's blend is chocolate cake, the man, the myth, the legend, and I'm running pretty low on it, so I'm going to have to do an order again pretty soon. You know who else should do a Nerd Tease order? You. Go to nerdtease.ca, use the promo code BWFinest, save yourself 15% at checkout, free shipping in Canada on any orders over $50. Nerdtease.ca, promo code BWFinest. Get yourself some delicious, delicious tea straight from Canada, eh? Have yourself something to love. You're going to find it on nerdtease.ca. Let's go to the Hammer now, where Ottawa's in town. REDBLACKS, Ticats. We will start with Ottawa, coming off of a 29-25 win over BC. A come-from-behind win against BC, mind you. The REDBLACKS scored 20 points in the second half of that football game and use a last-minute William Powell rushing touchdown to edge out the win over the Lions and avoid the upset. It was a busy night for Trevor Harris at quarterback. I wouldn't exactly call it a great night. It was okay. It was busy, certainly busy. 44 pass attempts. He went 30 of 44 for 68%. Threw for 363 yards. That's great, but did not find the end zone multiple times. Only found it once. But that one touchdown for Trevor Harris is the only touchdown he's scored in his last 2 games. He's actually thrown 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions over his last 2 games. You know who was great, though? Brad Sinopoli at wide receiver. What a monster game for Sinopoli last week. He's emerged as one of the best in the game right now. 11 catches, 171 yards, and did find the end zone one time. The Red Blacks on defense also generating 4 turnovers in that game, but they did take 10 penalties as a team. That's undisciplined. That's too many. Speaking of Hamilton, they're coming off of that 31-20 loss last week to the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Jeremiah Masoli's 300 yards per game streak ending. He did not throw a touchdown for the second straight game, as is starting to sound relatively familiar, and now stands alone under center in Hamilton with Johnny Manziel moving to Montreal. Hamilton played an efficient football game against Saskatchewan. I'm not going to sit here and say that they weren't efficient, but it was efficiency overruled by costly mistakes. Masoli was 71% passing. That's good. They were, 5.3 yards per carry on the ground. That's also good. Efficiency. But as a team, they took 7 penalties and they turned the ball over 5 times. Costly mistakes. What Hamilton really needed in that football game, especially when the game was closer than the final score indicated, what they really needed was they needed somebody to step up and make a play on defense, and nobody did. As a team, the Hamilton Tiger Cats had 0 sacks, 0 forced fumbles, 0 interceptions, couldn't even get a lousy pass knockdown. Absolutely nothing in terms of somebody on defense making a play, and in a tight game like that, especially when, your offense is turning the ball over quite a bit, you need somebody to make a play on defense when that game is close. Hamilton couldn't get it. Despite the two teams going in different directions, Ottawa with the win, Hamilton with the loss, as far as I'm concerned, this is pretty much the most even matchup that we've seen in the CFL this season, aside from, games in week 1 where we don't know what anybody has yet. Especially given the fact that this game is being played in Hamilton, which is probably my deciding factor here. I'm actually going to take the Ticats here. I'm going to take Hamilton at home to beat the Red Blacks. Vegas apparently agrees with me, although probably is a little more enthusiastic about things. Hamilton comes into this game 4.5-point favorites at home. Total in the game is set at 54.5. I think you have to take Ottawa plus 4.5 here, because where this is such an incredibly close game, either team can win. So I'd rather take the 4.5 points that are being given to me than say, Hamilton's going to win this game by at least 5 points. Total in the game again is 54.5 points. I think I have to stay under on it. These are two teams that the offenses are incredibly similar. The defenses are incredibly similar. And I'm seeing something like 44, 45 points. But we're going to stay under the 54.5 point total in Ottawa-Hamilton. And the last game we're going to look at might be the second most intriguing game of the week after, of course, the Montreal game, where we're going to see what happens with money. But Calgary visiting Saskatchewan. This is actually a very close game. We got both of these teams coming into this game off of wins. Obviously, Calgary, the 25-8 win over Montreal last week. Saskatchewan, the 31-20 win over Hamilton. On Calgary's side, Bo Levi-Mitchell, he looks like he's perfectly fine after that injury scare. Went 25 of 34, that's 73.5%. No arguments about that. 292 yards, 2 touchdowns. He did throw an interception, but look, we were wondering whether he was actually going to play last week or not. So, 1 interception, I think we can look past it. Stampeders had huge games in the receiving game from both wide receivers Eric Rogers and Kamar Jordan. They did have a quiet night on the ground, though. Don Jackson only had 46 yards on 17 carries. Calgary on defense generating 5 turnovers on the Alouettes. It was 2 interceptions and 3 turnovers on downs. They did sack Montreal's quarterback 3 times. They were an absolute dominant time of possession team in that game, 35 minutes plus. When you can get a 35-minute share with the football, it means good things for your offense, puts you in a great position to win. Saskatchewan side, like I mentioned, coming off of that 31-20 win over Hamilton. The Riders go on a 24-3 run in the second half. Hamilton really let that game slip away, and it was sparked by an 80-yard touchdown rumble from Marcus Thigpen just to kick off the third quarter. It was one of Saskatchewan's first plays from scrimmage in the second half. Brandon Bridge, a quarterback for Saskatchewan, was efficient. He was 17 of 22. That's 77%. Look, nobody's going to argue with 77%. 165 yards through the air. He did throw a touchdown. He did not throw an interception. He added 17 yards on 5 carries. Efficient. Unspectacular, but efficient. but the players around him were certainly spectacular, even if he wasn't. As a team, Saskatchewan on the ground, 29 carries, 218 yards, and of course Marcus Thigpen's 80-yard touchdown run. They generated 5 turnovers on defense, got 2 quarterback sacks, 3 pass knockdowns. Charleston Hughes, I love talking about the man, extending his CFL lead in sacks with 6 in 5 games. A total team win for the Riders. And that's what makes this matchup so interesting, because you've got 2 teams coming in off of pretty dominant victories, pretty total team dominant victories. I would say Saskatchewan had the tougher competition in that, but you've also got Calgary that's a 5-0 team. They have not been touched this season. The one thing that I can say for sure as I sit here today, and it's probably the only thing I can say for sure about this football game, is I don't think Brandon Bridge is good enough to beat the Calgary Stampeders. That's not a criticism even against him. I think he's been fine. Not great, but fine. I believe you have to be great. That's why I am going to take Calgary in this football game. I'm going to take the Stampeders to beat Saskatchewan in Saskatchewan, but I am going to hedge my bets on the line. Sasky, a 6.5-point dog at home. I think their defense is good enough to keep this game very close. Could be another sort of Hamilton Ottawa situation where the game either goes to overtime or it's settled by a field goal late. Total in this game is 47.5 points. It's a pretty good total because it's low. So many games in the CFL this season have gone under that this is actually a difficult line. I'm going to go over on it, but I think it's going to be tight. I could see like a 27-24 or like even a 26-23 would take it over, something like that. All right, folks, those are your picks for the Week 7 games, 2018 CFL season. Let's go over the picks with you one more time. I've got the Edmonton Eskimos going into Montreal to beat the Alouettes. Once again, there is no line and no total for that game yet. I will update those in the comments section, pin them to the top so they're the first thing you see in the comments. I've got Winnipeg at home beating Toronto to win both games in the back-to-back. I've got Winnipeg covering -11 in that game, in a game that stays under the 53 points. I've got Hamilton at home beating the Ottawa REDBLACKS. But I do have Ottawa plus 4.5 on the line there because, again, hedging the bets, it's a game that Ottawa could very well win. So let's go Ottawa plus 4.5 in a game that stays under 54.5 points, biggest total so far of the week. And I've got the Calgary Stampeders on the road in Saskatchewan beating the Roughriders. I will take Saskatchewan plus 6.5 on the line in a game that goes over 47.5 points. There you go, folks. That is going to do it for Week 7 in the CFL. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the lovely folks at Tease. We're on a bit of a hot streak here. We're going to see if we can't keep this thing rolling. Enjoy the games in Week 7. And hey, for those of you that have stuck around, I have to say thank you. Going through YouTube and doing searches for people doing CFL picks, after 7 weeks, this is basically the second biggest CFL show on YouTube. Like, there's an SBR channel that does weekly CFL picks. I'm coming for you, SBR. No, really, I'm not. So they have a channel. They have 45,000 subscribers, and they get, about 3-4 times sometimes the views that this show gets. But then it's them, and then it's us. So, I mean, look, it's a pretty big gap between 1 and 2. But I'm incredibly proud of the fact that this is, at worst, like the third biggest CFL show on all of YouTube. Now, look, there's not a lot of people doing CFL picks, and that's part of the reason that I wanted to say this. If you are someone who is a fan of the CFL, if you already do YouTube, if you're thinking about getting into it, please add your voice to this community because it's a small community right now. Do picks for Week 8. Talk about the Manziel trade, something like that. Just get on here and add your voice to a small community because I'm sure you can make it better. Once again, enjoy the games in Week 7. We'll see you again in Week 8.